Hello everyone, and welcome to episode number 10 on how to build your own rock buggy. Today we're going to talk about electrical. So electrical is something very important. Now you've built your buggy, you painted it, you assembled it, you put all the major components on the buggy, and you're ready to finish it and go off-roading. However, one last thing is left for you to do, and that is electrical. So some people might be intimidated by electrical connections in a buggy or wiring or diagrams, but don't worry. Today I'm going to show you a simplified version of how to wire your buggy. So first of all, before I start, I need to talk to you about some of the electrical components that are used in an off-road buggy. And the first one that I'm going to talk about is relay. So this is an automotive Bosch style relay that is used. I normally have 4 or 5 or 6 of them in the buggy. So I'm going to show you how to wire these actual relays. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to show you a picture of how a relay looks like. This is kind of a wiring diagram of a relay. Basically, you have to understand how a relay works. So a relay normally has 4 terminals, and 2 of these terminals are going to have a thick electrical wire, which is meant to transmit positive 12 volt and normally 30 or 40 amps, so a lot of current, from one of these terminals. In this example, it's terminal number 30, and then we want to transmit it to terminal number 87, which in this case we're powering lights or spotlights. And both of these terminals, the 30 and the 87, are actually positive. Now, how are we going to get the power from the 30 to the 87? Basically, we're going to apply another power to it. So basically, we're going to use a switched 12 volt. This can be very low current. It's usually 5 amps or 10 amps, so it's not a very high current that we're going to apply on terminal number 86. And then terminal number 85 can be ground. And then once you apply both a ground and a 12 volt power to terminal 86 and ground to terminal 87, the current is going to connect between 30 and 87, and this is how we're going to have the spotlights turn on. So basically here, this is what I have. I have a Bosch style relay. These are very, very cheap. They sell quite cheaply, and they normally last quite a bit of time. And some of them come with 4 terminals, but others come with 5 terminals. So the reason why some of them come with another terminal in the middle, this is depending if you want the relay to be normally closed or normally open. But in our case, for the off-road buggies, 99.9% of the time, it's always going to be normally open. So that means the two big terminals are actually not connected all the time, and we want to connect them. So this is a normal, if you go to the electrical store and you buy a pigtail for one of these relays, this is what you have. This is really nice because you can connect several pigtails, one with the others. They kind of slide, they snap with each other here, and then you can just put the relay in each one of them. Actually, the relay will fit only one way, so there's no way to mix up the wires because it won't go in any other way. So now the relay is installed. Now let's look at the wires here, what we have. So basically, all we need are only 4 wires, 4 terminals. So the center one, in this case it's the red one, we're not going to use because that's used for the normally closed relays, and we only use normally open relays. So I can look at these wires. The black and the white are actually thinner gauge than the blue and the yellow. So what I'm going to do is now, so the black, you can either use it for positive or negative. It doesn't really matter that much. So we can assume we're going to use this one as the positive. Okay, so this is going to be my switch. So I'm going to put a switch onto this wire with a low current, positive 12 volt. And then for the white, I'm going to use it as a ground. So I just ground it to the chassis normally. And then terminal number, the yellow wire and the blue wire. So assume the blue wire is going to go to my lights. Okay, so this is going to be the positive to my lights, and it's carrying, say, 30 amps of current. And so the yellow is going to go to the battery, or to a fuse source. It depends the size of the fuse. You can put a fuse source onto here as well as an added security. So it goes from the battery to a fuse, which is probably 40 amps, and then from here to the relay, and then this goes to the lamps or to the lights. And then now, basically, because you're applying a positive to here, you can either switch positive or the ground. So assume your light switch is on the ground. As you flick the switch on and off, it's going to connect the current from the yellow to the blue. Okay, some of the other components that you're going to need, basically a fuse block, similar to this one here. There are several different styles. You can pick the one that you want, or you can even use fuses, inline fuses like that. So you're gonna need those, and obviously a whole bunch of switches and wires. Number 8, number 10, number 12, number 14. Sometimes you need that. Also some really thick gauge wire, like number 1, 2, 6, even 0 and 00 as well. And so once you have all these electrical components, now you're ready to start wiring. Okay. So I basically like to divide the electrical wiring in a buggy in 3 different sections, okay? So section number 1 is basically from the battery to the very large electrical items. These could be the winch, the alternator, the rear steer, hydraulic electric valve, anything really heavy electrical that consumes a lot of amperage. I put them in a somewhat in my head. I divide them in a circuit that is completely different, and then the next part of electrical, the next circuit, sum of circuits, if you want, are all the fans, the lights, all the other relays that run off the ignition switch. And then finally, the last part of the electrical is the engine electrical. And the engine electrical is I'm not going to talk about that because this is engine specific. So you have to connect the ECM and a whole bunch of other different, sensors, like oxygen sensor, the idle air control, the throttle position sensor, a whole bunch of them. There's a lot of those sensors. I'll leave those alone because they are engine dependent, but I'm going to talk to you about the 2 other electrical systems and I'm going to show you the diagrams. I'm going to explain every one of them. Alright, so we're going to start off by telling you some of the different wire gauges and how many amps each one of them will actually hold. So for instance, this one, I have number 8 wire. It will run 40 amps, 12, 20, 10, 30, 1, 110, number 2, 95, 0, 125, and 00, 145. So once you have all these wires, and I'll try to tell you where to use each one of those wires. So for instance, I'm going to start off with here. So I have my battery. So the battery is right here. So what I'm going to use a very large switch. This is a marine type switch here that disconnects the ground from the chassis. Okay, so it disconnects the ground, the battery negative, from the chassis. So I'm going to use the chassis itself as the ground for every single electrical system on my buggy. So this large red electrical switch is going to go on the negative side of the battery. And then the first item is I'm going to have my winch. So you have to be careful to connect the winch not directly to the negative battery post, but you have to connect it to the negative side or the ground side. So the other post, not this post, the other post of the big large battery switch. Now it's very important that this switch here is large enough to handle the current by the winch. This switch here should be rated about 600 amps intermittent. So it's a very large switch. It will not melt or anything like that. So the winch wire is normally either number 1 or number 0. It's always better to be on the safe side and always run wires larger than you need in terms of amperage. So I have very large wires here. These are normally either number 0 or number 1 gauge wires. They are going from the battery positive. The first one goes to the winch. I have another one that is going to my rear steer electric over hydraulic valve, and there's a very large ground that grounds to the chassis here. And I also have my joystick, this is a different system. I'm not going to really talk about it that much. And then after that, I have a very large ground, the very large positive cable that goes here, and it goes to the starter solenoid. So the starter solenoid works exactly like a relay, except it is larger for larger current draws. So as I've already explained to you with the relays, there's going to be kind of 3 positive connections and 1 negative. So the first negative connection is basically just the current to actuate the solenoid. So this here and this are going to actuate the solenoid. So I'm going to have a 12-volt fused. So normally I put about 10 amps or 15 amps. This is just enough current to be able to actuate the actuator inside the solenoid to close the circuit. And then this is going to be my engine start button, usually 15 or 20 amps here. It's a momentary switch that's going to come right here. So basically, I am connecting through the solenoid. Okay, I am connecting the positive from the battery to the positive that goes to the engine starter. Okay, so as soon as I press this button, this here is going to be live all the time. It's going to be fused and live. So as soon as I press this button, it's going to let the current in. It's going to ground. So it's going to close the circuit here. And then it's going to close the circuit between these two here. And then basically it's going to allow current to go to the starter. I wire it like this because it allows me to turn the engine without having to turn my ignition switch on. So this way here, it's completely independent of the engine. Okay, and it has worked really nicely for me. And then what else do I have? So basically, I have a large cable coming from the battery and it going to a fuse panel basically. So this is where I have my fuse panels. You know, where one of those fuses is I call it ignition fuse. It's normally 20 amps, and it actually feeds an ignition bus bar. So there's going to be a whole bunch of wire that's going to connect to this ignition bus bar. So this is a on-off switch that as you turn it on, it will actually power this bus bar here, and it will allow you to power every single system in your buggy, which I'm going to show you on the other page here. So, and also from the ignition bus bar, you're going to feed the ECM, the alternator live wires. So this is just for sensing only. However, for the alternator, I have a very large alternator on my buggy, and I run a number 0 gauge wire that goes through here with a 150 amp fuse from the alternator straight to the battery. Okay, so that's it. This is part 1 of the first electrical system. Now the second one. Here you go. So the second electrical system, it's for the fans and the relays and the lights. So this is how I drew it. So if you look here, this is basically the front of the buggy, and here is the back of the buggy. So first of all, I'm going to have my radiator with the 2 cooling fans. Each one of those cooling fans is going to have a negative and a positive. Both of the negative, they come together and they connect to a stud in the chassis for the ground, while the 2 positives are going to be fed from 2 different relays. Okay, so I'm gonna have cooling fan relay number 2 and cooling fan relay number 1. Okay, so in order for me to feed positive current, positive voltage, if you want, to the relays to allow them to go to the fans, they're gonna come from a 12-volt fused source. Okay, normally about 20 amps here, or basically depends on your fan here. And after that, I'm going to have 12-volt IGN. The IGN is ignition. So these 2 here, so this one and this one, will actually connect to the ignition bus bar. So that means I will power it on and off with my ignition switch, meaning that when I turn off my ignition switch, the cooling fans are going to turn off too. Okay, so here you go. I got, once again, I got 4 terminals on each relay. Positive, 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 and then negative. Okay, so now I got this positive going to the one of the fans, and this positive is going to another fan. These are the large gauge. Normally I use number 12 or number 10 gauge here, and then these other 2 small ones, which is the plus 12 IGN and the negative one, are going to be smaller gauge. The plus 12V fuse is going to be a large gauge again. Once again, this is a number 10 or number 12. Okay, and depending on the cooling fans, once again, how many currents you're running. So, and the last really neat thing here is for the cooling fans is you have to remember that you need some sort of a switch. And the switch is, I highly recommend that you do not leave it as a manual because you will forget about it. You have to make it automatic. So what do? There are special thermal cooling grounding switches that are sold online, and SPAL actually has them. You can buy them from Summit Racing or Jegs, and they install straight in the engine intake, manifold where the coolant would be flowing. So they would be touching the coolant. And then all they do is that they ground at 190 Fahrenheit and they unground at 180. But there's different types. Some of them are on at 190, off at 180. Some of them are like on at 180, off at 170. You can pick and choose whichever one you want. Okay, so these are basically grounds, and I use both of them to ground the two relays here. And then once these relays are grounded, now it's going to allow the current to flow from the plus 12 volt fuse to the fan itself. Both of them are going to do it at the same time. Okay, so the same principle here with my transmission cooling fan. Once again, it's going to be grounded, and I'm going to have a positive coming to the trans fan relay. And then once again, plus 12 volt fused, and then plus 12 volt ignition. And then the negative for the relay here is going to come from another inline thermal switch. These are once again sold online, where the transmission fluid goes through the this particular switch, and then once it reaches a certain temperature, it turns on, or actually it grounds. So basically you have to connect one of the wires to the ground of the chassis, and then it will be completely automatic operation. You don't have to even think about it. Finally, at the back of the buggy, we have the fuel pump. So the fuel pump is going to be grounded, and I ground it very close to where the fuel pump is. And then I have the positive wire, probably number 12 here to be on the safe side. It goes to a fuel pump relay. So once again, the fuel pump relay, normally it's either incorporated with the ECM or the engine harness. But here I'm just going to write it down. So it's a fuel pump relay that's grounded somewhere near it to the chassis. And then plus 12 volt fused, and then the plus 12 volt ECM. So this is the signal from the ECM is going to come. It's going to tell the fuel pump relay to turn on. We need power here. So it basically allows power from the 12 volt fuse that go into the large positive wire that goes to feed the fuel pump. Okay, so finally the last one that I have is the lights relay. So the lights for the relay, I ground it. Well, there's two ways of doing it. This is one way of doing it here. You can do it however way you want, but I just ground it right next to the relay itself, and then I feed the relay from a plus 12 volt fused, and from the same source I put a switch on it. And this is the small wire here. This is the small, this is the large positive, and this is the wire that goes to the lights. So as soon as I apply voltage to here by turning the switch on, I apply positive voltage to here. It's already grounded, so it's gonna click here, and basically it's gonna allow voltage to go from here to here. And then I splice it, and I put a wire for my gauges as well to light up when I turn the lights on. And usually for the lights, I just ground them right next to where the wires, right next to where the lights are. All right, so that's pretty much it for electrical. It's hard for me to help you out with the electrical for the engine itself because it's completely different. It depends on the engine that you're using, and obviously you're gonna have to modify the harness of the engine that you get. You have to remove the pollution sensors and anything related to emissions. Some of them are required to be used, but others, you can take them off. But so you basically have to disassemble the original harness from your engine, or get somebody else to do it for you, and they can relabel it and send it back to you. and you can incorporate it in whatever system you've already built for the buggy, well, whatever electrical system you've already built. So that's it then for today, and actually that's it for this whole series. I hope you enjoyed following along, and once again, don't be shy to ask me questions. I try to explain to you as much as I know. I'm obviously not an expert. I'm just basically letting you know what I have learned on my own, building my off-road buggies, and I also let you know by experience what has worked and what has not worked. So my plan from now on is to basically post videos once in a while about off-roading trips or some of the other projects that I have in the garage. I usually either build small things for my buggy or fix several things, and I'll try to make videos as I work on it, just to show you what kind of work is done on these off-road buggies, and hopefully I'll show you some off-roading videos as well from my adventures. So thanks again, and please don't forget to like these videos. I really appreciate the likes, and once again, if you can subscribe, that would also be awesome. Thank you, and take care.